Hey again everyone. Well, I promised you some Christmas crafts, so that's what we're going to be doing this week. I'm going to show you how to make cornflower clay, which is a really easy thing to put together and a really nice thing to use to make your own Christmas decorations, or well, anything else that you might like to make out of it really. It's pretty simple, only needs a few ingredients. Obviously some cornflour, and then you also need a decent amount of bicarbonate of soda. I've also got some food colouring out for it as well. Entirely optional, but it's a really good way to get some colour into the clay if you want it pre-coloured before you bake it. Cutters, cookie cutters, any shape you want, anyone will do. Measuring cups, big old rolling pin, and you will need a bit of water as well. I'll give you the exact measurements for everything in just a moment. Now these get cooked in a saucepan first, and then they also get cooked in the oven, so it's double baked essentially. The first one is just to make the clay, the second one is to set it. But we'll make the clay first. Now I always just measure everything straight into the saucepan. So let's start with half a cup of bicarbonate of soda, quarter of a cup of corn flour. Really messy stuff, it is going to get everywhere. And then you need a third of a cup of water. I'm eyeballing that, it's probably not quite right. You'll know if it's wrong because you'll need to add more of the dry ingredients if it comes out too runny. It's kind of hideous when you start. You just need to put that on a low heat, small hob, and warm it up until it forms a ball of dough. Cookie, what are you doing? Oh. She came to say hello. Oh, Cookie, did you invade? So you just gently keep it mixed as it heats, and eventually it will clump together and start to form your dough. It's going to feel like nothing's happening for quite some time, but you can see there it's just starting to thicken up a little bit. I should point out, it's perfectly fine to do this in a saucepan that you would cook food in as well. This is my cheap old saucepan that I do everything in, because it's just corn flour and bicarbonate. It's essentially just food and a cleaning product, so you're perfectly fine to do that. I would make sure you put water in it afterwards though, just to soak off all of the crispy crunchy bits there, because they will stick to the saucepan really badly if you don't get them out quickly. It's a little bit like choux pastry. Essentially what you need it to do is ball together like a choux pastry would. That's looking pretty good. I would say that's pretty much done. So I'm just going to tip this out onto the countertop, and then we need to knead it a little bit. So you see I've got my ball of dough. It will be really hot, obviously, it's just come out of the saucepan, so leave it to cool for a little bit. As it cools, it will harden off a little bit as well. When you knead it, I like to dust the surface a little bit with a bit more corn flour, just because it stops it sticking to absolutely everything. Adding that little bit of extra corn flour does sort of smooth the surface off a little bit as well. Gives you a nice sort of finish on the top. This is when you can add your food colouring if you're going to use it. So I am going to add some food colouring. So what I should do is plonk it down. I like to use gel food colouring because you get really vibrant colours from them. This one's just a jade, and you only need a tiny, tiny little amount, and it comes out this sort of nice tealy blue colour. There we go. Tiny little splodge. And then you fold it in, essentially. And it can create this nice sort of marbled effect to your clay. So you can mix it in as little or as much as you want. It does now up the water content, so it will get a bit stickier. Just add more corn flour if you need it. So if you are keen on the really marbled effect, you can just sort of leave it like that and then roll it out with a rolling pin and cut out your shapes. But I'm going to mix it in a bit more than that. And I'm going to keep adding corn flour because this is really sticky. I think that's about as mixed in as I want it. I would make sure the surface is really decently covered in corn flour before you roll it, and obviously dust your rolling pin as well. So you just roll it to whatever thickness you actually need it to be, really. I don't do them hugely thick because I find they're a bit less delicate that way. If you wanted it really, really even, you could obviously put 2 evenly sized planks of wood either side and roll over that, and you'll get the same width of dough all the way across. And if you're someone who's got one of those really fancy laser etched rolling pins with all the designs on them, that would be really good for this, because then you'll get a really nice sort of pattern across the top. I do want one of those. So that's all right for me, so I'm going to cut it. I just use that size for Christmas decorations. It's a decent sort of bauble size, I would say. And I've got a baking tray over there that's already got greaseproof on it. I'm just going to lay them out on that. If they stick to the counter, they will warp and bend out of shape, so make sure your counter is really, really cornfloury. Obviously, don't waste the scraps, keep rolling it out until you have nothing left to cut out from. If they pop up with the cutter and drop out into your hand, that is the best way to do it. They don't always do that though. I've got a really weird tiny little bit left, which probably isn't going to be big enough for one whole circle, but I am going to make more clay. So I'm just going to keep this to the side, and then with whatever dregs I've got left after I've finished my next few lots of clay, I'll add it all together and try and use that instead. Minimise as much waste as possible. I would always recommend washing your hands in between batches of clay, because obviously I've got very green hands now and I have got a layer of clay just attached to me, so I need to get that off before I can touch anything else really. Hands are clean, saucepan's clean, we're good to go with another batch. Exactly the same quantities unless you know you want larger amounts of one colour. I'm just going to do exactly the same thing, and I think these ones are going to be black this time, just to see how that turns out. It's got my second lot of dough, going to add the black. Probably don't need very much of this at all. Because even though we're past Halloween, just wanted to see if I could do Halloween themed decorations as well. Oh wow, that's really liquid. Start with tiny amounts. If you wanted to add more colour, make things more vibrant, you always can. Now it's coming out more grey at the moment, so I am going to add more black. It's definitely coming out darker now. Looks a bit more like volcanic rock, which is quite cool. So I've reached a point where I've got a really weird amount of both left, so I'm just going to mix them together and see what happens. That's all I've got left, and it's not enough to really do anything with, and I'm running out of corn flour as well, so I can't make any more clay. So that will have to go in the bin, but that's okay. I got as much out of it as I could. And then you stand, and then you stare, and you go, why did I do this? It's made such a mess. It's alright, it's not too bad. It cleans up pretty easy. All that clay business definitely dries out your hands, so moisturise them as well as wash them. I would recommend anyway, because the bicarbonate's quite rough. Well, mine is. It's got a really sort of thick crystal to it, and it really dries out your skin. So make sure to look after your hands after you've done this. So there they are, ready to go. How many you get out of it depends on how thin you roll them, really. That one's the mixture of the two. It's got a couple of blue flecks in it, should be quite interesting. They are still quite cornfloury. That will probably all come off once they've cooked and you dust them off. I always sand mine once they're finished, just to smooth off the edges a little bit, because like I said, my bicarbonate is quite a heavy crystal, so it does make them a tiny bit rough. But yeah, these just go in the oven at 100 degrees roughly for an hour, just a low heat really. Keep an eye on them, because if they start to discolour they might be burning, but otherwise you should be good to go. I'm going to prick holes in them as well, just in the top, so that you can hang them once they're done. You can do that with a little cocktail stick and just sort of twiddle it around and create a hole in the top. We can use the end of a straw as well. I'm going to be a disgusting human being and opt for the straw, because these now illegal objects are all in the drawer from something we bought ages and ages ago. Need to use them for something, certainly not drinking out of them. So they are cooked. They do crackle a little bit more once they're cooked, because obviously there's a little bit of cracking in some places. That entirely depends on how thinly you roll it again. But they're not too bad. I did these pretty quickly, to be fair. I could probably do a lot better if I spent a little bit longer working on them. But the sort of crackling is why I sand them off before I do anything else with them. You can, of course, before you cook them, roll pressed flowers or leaves and things into the tops to decorate them with. What I do is, once I've sanded them down, I paint over the top of them and then varnish them and add the ribbon to hang them up with, and end up with something like that. That's obviously much neater than any of the ones I've just done, but yeah, they work pretty well, I think. I started learning how to do this as an alternative to using plastic baubles, because for years I've been painting plastic baubles to sell as decorative Christmas objects, but the amount of plastic involved in that really bothers me these days. So yeah, this was my alternative, because then I've made the whole thing rather than buying in the plastic and then painting it. I am hoping at some point to learn how to make porcelain clay. You can make porcelain yourself at home out of very similar ingredients. I know you have to have lemon juice for part of it, and you have to store it in the fridge and let it. It's slightly more complicated, but I am going to give it a go at some point. If it works, I might just show you guys as well. Yeah, you should totally give this a go. It's good fun. And something else I did discover you can do with these, especially where they've cracked, and if you don't sand them off too much, you can actually use them as pomanders. So you can decorate the front if you want. Every single drawer in my room upstairs, there's one of these that's not looking so good. It's bent maybe while it's been cooking. It's not perfect looking. But then I just drop a few bits of essential oil onto the back, usually either cedarwood or eucalyptus, because they're pesticides, and then stick them in all the drawers. And where I buy so much second-hand clothing and furniture, it's one of the easiest ways to invite carpet moths and beetles into your house, and that sort of prevents them from spreading, or it kills them off, or just keeps on top of the problem. It wasn't too bad, but they did eat a little bit of my carpet, so I had to do something about that. So now I've got to put my thinking cap back on, think of something for you all for next week, but in the meantime, give some handmade Christmas decorations a go. They make brilliant gifts. If you're stuck for anyone for Christmas, then just make something. Why not? And it's so much nicer than anything you can sort of buy in a generic shop, Give it a go. Get creative. Everybody can do it. See you all next week, guys.